Welcome everyone, I am Adesewa Josh and this is Africa Matters. A long-awaited apology for slavery by the Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte falls short of satisfying hopes of reparations. Kenya's President William Ruto marks his first 100 days in office as Kenyans hope the new administration will deliver on its promises. And in Nigeria, a new national language policy makes native languages compulsory in primary schools. Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte has formally apologized for his country's role in the brutal transatlantic slave trade, which saw mostly Portugal, Britain, France, the US, Denmark, and his country, the Netherlands, uproot more than 15 million Africans from their ancestral lands over the course of 400 years. Historians estimate that at the height of the Dutch Empire, between the 16th and the 19th centuries, Dutch traders exploited, enslaved, and shipped up to 600,000 Africans to their colonies in South America and the Caribbean, where they worked primarily on sugar plantations. Many of the slaves were from West Africa, where the Dutch initially began trading with coastal tribes before taking over their lands and enslaving the people. They abducted their first group of people from the Gold Coast in present-day Ghana and later briefly colonized the country. They also invaded and took control of parts of Ivory Coast, Angola, Namibia, Mozambique, Senegal, Mauritania, including Sao Tome and Principe. And at the turn of the 18th century, the Dutch established their first settlement on the continent in Cape Town, South Africa. They ruled and continued to trade slaves through the Dutch East India Trading Company for 250 years until the early 20th century, when the British took full control following the Second Anglo-Boer War of 1899 to 1902. In his remarks at The Hague, Rutte described the actions of the Dutch state as crimes against humanity. The Netherlands now joins Denmark, France, the UK, and the European Parliament, which have issued apologies or officially recognized slavery and the slave trade as a war crime. Rutte says the Dutch government has no plans to pay reparations to the descendants of African slaves. Instead, it will spend about $30 million on a slavery museum and allocate $200 million to slavery awareness projects.
Eeuwenlang is.
So for a long time, I actually thought that our slavery past was history that lies behind us. But I was wrong, because centuries of oppression and exploitation affect the here and now, in racist stereotypes, in discriminatory patterns of exclusion and social inequality. And to break through that, we must also face the past openly and honestly.
Meanwhile, descendants of African slaves in the former Dutch colony of Suriname, where Dutch plantation owners made huge profits through the use of enslaved labor, have rejected the apology. They say it should have come from the Dutch king, Willem Alexander, and been made on the 1st July next year, when Suriname marks the 150th anniversary of the end of slavery.
No, we do not accept the way the apology was presented. First, we are going to evaluate and discuss it internally and then give advice to the Surinamese government if they must accept the apologies, where to accept them, and when.
Now let's hear more from Quinsy Gario, an Afro-Dutch activist and artist. He joins me from Amsterdam. Thank you so much for joining us. What is the Dutch trying to achieve with this apology?
I think it's twofold. On the one hand, it's about cutting off the path towards actual financial reparations. Prime Minister Rutte in the Q&A afterwards explicitly said that this is not about compensating for the labor that was done during slavery. So the descendants of those who were enslaved will not be receiving any compensation. And I think one of the things which he did with the speech as well was specifically say that based on the laws of today, what happened in the past was unjust, and not actually acknowledge that based on the laws of yesterday and back then already it was unjust and a crime against humanity. So it is a way of presenting himself as once again part of a guiding light in these conversations of reparations, but also figuring out the way to include it in those apologies, cutting off of any actual repairing of the systems that have been in place since colonialism and since slavery.
Right. So you said the laws of today. Is it possible to truly address a historical injustice like slavery without reparations?
I mean, it's clear it's not. The systems we have in place, the racial imaginary that we have in place, the stereotypes that we have in place come from that period. So anything which does not address those is just woefully lacking in actually fixing the problems that we have at the moment. What we see in the Netherlands especially is that we still have systems in place whereby risk profiles are conducted based on algorithms which are racially motivated. We have the director who was part of the board of directors of the tax office, then went on to be the board of directors and leading the border patrol, who has been fighting in court to keep ethnic profiling in play when it determines who is a risk or not. And that same person is now become the head of Frontex, which is once again one of those organizations that keeps people of color and Black people out of Europe and suppresses them and oppresses them. So reparations is much more than just financial. It's also about thinking of these systems that have been put in place to oppress us.
Right. So what is the most strategic way former colonies can seek redress for the impact of slavery on their societies?
I think there are various ways in which it should be done and could be done. Education is one. I mean, we've talked about this for decades already. We need to know where we come from to be able to address where we're going to and how we get there. On the other hand, we also need to talk about the ways in which development aid is used as a crutch and presented as a salve for the damage done in the past while still structurally destabilizing current societies. And we also need to talk about the ways in which border regimes are still put in place that perpetuate those same systems of in and out in those borders that have oppressed us for as long as we know. I mean, Mark Rutte himself stepped down as prime minister because his last cabinet perpetuated and conducted institutional racism. He himself put in place policy through which Somali Dutch residents were hunted basically by police. And in 2007, that policy was deemed as racist by the courts. Right. So what we have is the perpetuation of colonial logics, of slavery logics, and those need to be looked at to understand what's going on now.
What are your thoughts on the argument that Western aid donations over the years should be a substitute for reparations?
And that's insulting. I think the Western aid in and of itself needs to be seen also sometimes as a Trojan horse to destabilize internal markets and to destabilize economies and to keep countries dependent on the West. We need to understand that the aid itself is not a salve for the damage done in the past and the ways in which not just financial, but also social, cultural, and environmental damage has been done. So, no, whoever says that is trying to insult you, and I think those people need to take a seat.
Right. So there's now money, not for the descendants of slaves, but for educational awareness programs and for a museum. Is that your idea? Does this fit into your idea of reparations in addressing the past?
Partly. I think the museum can be an interesting spot where conversations can happen, where we can have these much needed discourses on what exactly we need to dismantle in the Netherlands. But at the same time, we need to make sure that these spaces and these educational campaigns don't kowtow to the same type of rules of not making it too difficult and not making it too uncomfortable for the dominant and ruling classes. What we need is a way of understanding how the elite, financially, monetary, economically, culturally, are still based off of the extraction of resources elsewhere, and that's what needs to be redressed.
Thank you so much, Quinsy Gario, an Afro-Dutch activist and artist, for speaking to Africa Matters on this very interesting topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Ade. Have a great show.
We have more stories coming up for you here on Africa Matters, including
I am Anne Macharia in Kenya's capital, Nairobi, where civil societies are monitoring William Ruto's administration. They say out of 90% of the promises made, 40% have been implemented. Around 50 remain at different stages of completion.
And I'm in Tsepeng Mudema. I'll show you how fashion designers are seeing a higher demand for African print outfits as attitudes towards traditional clothing are shifting.
First, we head to Kenya now, where President William Ruto marked his first 100 days in office on Thursday. Very little has changed since the president took office. And as Anne Macharia reports, the rising cost of living and unforgiving fuel prices have Kenyans wondering whether the new administration will deliver on its promises.
On September 13th, William Ruto vowed to ease the lives of Kenyans. He said he would empower small-scale enterprises and boost Kenya's food production within the first 100 days of his presidency. Now, those promises are ringing hollow. Lewis Okoth's fruit stall attracts low-income earners. They pay less than $1 for fruit salad and a glass of juice. Business might be booming, but inflation is weighing him down.
Nothing. We've not seen anything good. The situation remains the same. Goods have risen. We now have to pay more than we used to pay before to get some commodities.
Economists are already predicting tough times for Kenyans if the economy doesn't turn around.
Well, the pressure is huge because Kenyans are living an impossible life. So I think things matters tax policy have to be looked at, particularly on fuel.
The government scrapped a fuel subsidy in September, and the price of fuel has been rising since then. The ripple effect is being felt by businesses on the edge, and the increasing number of families living on the streets is higher than ever. A report by the Kenya Institute for Public Policy Research and Analysis, KIPRA, showed that a third of Kenyans are unable to pay house rent, and over 6 million Kenyans have lost their jobs or seen their wages cut significantly. A few weeks ago, the government launched its eagerly awaited Hustler Fund, a $410 million loan scheme aimed at lifting millions out of poverty. But it's left many Kenyans wanting. Charles Odwor, a border rider, was disappointed with the amount he qualified for.
If you give me 500 shillings, you have not helped me. Because with that amount, you want me to buy 2 packets of flour for that day. I don't think he's any different from former President Uhuru Kenyatta.
Despite the backlash it's received, the Ruto-led government has told off the opposition, saying it will stay focused on empowering Kenyans by funding the project, despite the criticism. The cost of living is skyrocketing, and the nation is divided along ethnic fault lines, which threaten to disrupt national unity. President William Ruto's aim to secure Kenya as a progressive country remains to be seen. That is the question we will be answering over the next 4.5 years. Anne Macharia, Africa Matters, Nairobi.
And now to Nigeria, where the government has approved a national policy to save its indigenous languages from extinction. Nearly 500 dialects are spoken across the country's 3 major tribes, the Igbo, Yoruba, and Hausa, but many of them are disappearing, especially among the younger generation. To preserve the languages, the federal government has approved a new national language policy, making various indigenous languages compulsory in primary schools. Samson Omale reports.
These 4 to 9-year-olds are learning English, Nigeria's official language. But now these kids are set to learn a new language, their mother tongue, and they are excited about it.
I think it will help me more in my school, and I'll be able to understand my language. When someone is speaking my language, I'll be able to understand it and know it well and answer the person in the correct answer.
So when I grew up, I want to study geomining, and when I go to my village, I had a lot of minerals there. So when I go there to go and mine, it will be easier for me to interact with others.
It's good to speak your language because it helps you to learn better, it helps you to interact with people, and it helps you for better communication.
Nigeria's education minister says implementing dozens of different dialects into public primary schools will be difficult but important for the country's heritage.
In principle, it has been agreed, but I know implementing it will require a lot of work to develop the material, to teach and get the teachers and so on. But the policy has been approved. So before it becomes fully operational, government has to get teachers, the supply of teachers, and then we develop instructional materials.
Dr. Ekaite Etang is a principal of a primary and secondary school in Jos in the country's central north. She believes the policy is too little, too late.
When you think in a language that is foreign to you, I don't think you even have the capacity to comprehend everything because it's not your own. I see for us in Africa that has become part of our predicament. It's a very positive move, only that I consider it late.
The government says local languages will be compulsory and the only medium of instructions in primary schools when this new curriculum is introduced. Authorities say Nigeria's official language, English, won't be ignored, but will only be taught in secondary schools.
The government cites research by the UN's education body UNESCO that shows education in the mother tongue promotes inclusion, quality learning, and boosts academic performance. But parents have mixed feelings.
To be taught in school in their local dialects, what comes to my mind is, do they have qualified teachers to teach them my local dialect, or are they going to push them along the lines of the few dialects that have been standardized and they have curriculum for? I think they should leave that alone to parents to work out modalities on how to ensure their children learn their mother tongue.
There is no start date for the introduction of the new language policy yet, but the public debate about where it should be taught continues. Samson Omale, Africa Matters, Jos, Nigeria.
In post-apartheid South Africa, attitudes about African print fabrics are complicated. And until recently, the brightly colored garments weren't considered appropriate for everyday clothing. But that's changing, as Nsepeng Motema reports from Johannesburg.
Lovelyn Nkeokeluonye imports traditional cloth from all over Africa, which she sells in her Johannesburg shop. When the Nigerian national opened this business 16 years ago, her stock was mostly from West Africa.
When we started newly, it was like, what is this? What are you wearing? People was like, yeah, you look so different, what is this? But as time goes on, they begin to get used to it, they begin to love it, they begin to embrace it.
Now, she sources materials from all over the continent, and more people are using them to make everyday clothing. Seboma Robela is a regular customer.
It makes me excited, it makes me happy. So it's almost like a feeling.
He says one of the reasons South Africans have fallen in love with these prints is because of popular cultural festivals.
Festivals like Afro-Chella, Afro-Punk, those festivals have been centered around celebrating African cultures. And therefore, when you go to these festivals, you wear your best African look, your best African fabrics. So now people are not only wearing that for festivals, they take it to the office, they take it to the clubs, they take it to work.
But it hasn't always been this way. Historically, in South Africa, traditional garments have been reserved for important cultural ceremonies and not used as daily clothing. But there's also another reason. Because of negative attitudes towards African cultures instilled during colonialism and apartheid, South Africans often didn't consider this clothing appropriate for professional settings or everyday wear. Until recently, many wouldn't have worn African prints outside of traditional events. Since the dawn of South African democracy, there's been national efforts to get Black people to embrace their cultures openly. Each year, the country celebrates Heritage Day, a public holiday in which all are encouraged to honor their cultural traditions. Many do so through their clothing. Wishes Boutique, in one of Johannesburg's upscale neighborhoods, specializes in African print clothing. Wishes Pende from Zimbabwe has been running the shop since 2016, and over the years, her offerings have expanded beyond clothes.
We only used to see these African prints in only clothes, but now people are loving these in a lot of things. Now we can get earrings, we can get bags, we can get cushions, and people are loving it more and more.
Pende says while it's been good to see people's attitudes change, there's still some way to go. Western clothing still dominates local fashion, but she hopes that with time, traditional fabrics will be valued just as much as any other style. Ntshepeng Mutima, TRT World, Johannesburg.
Welcome back. You're watching Africa Matters with me, Adesewa Josh. Urban Craft, an Istanbul-based architectural design company, is bringing together talented creatives from Africa, Turkey, and around the world to collaborate. And since 2018, an art exhibition to celebrate and showcase their creative journey has been held in Istanbul every November. This year's exhibition featured themes around some of Nigeria's gods and deities, the evolution of the female mind on canvas, and the infinity murmurations of pigeons, which, according to the artist, symbolizes the soul of Istanbul. Yunus Emre reports.
5 floors below ground, in the basement of a business center in Istanbul, an unexpected sight. An art studio turned festival. Each piece tells a different story. The art embodies African culture and history, like symbols invented during Africa's colonization period, so the local people could communicate with each other without their oppressors' understanding.
Artists here have revived those symbols in expression with the theme of the event, through collaboration, the journey to love.
Urban Craft Studios are not here just to give a history lesson. The group brings together African and Turkish artists. Stephen Akai Simples, the creative director of the festival, explains the importance of inclusivity.
We want to get collaboration, we want to be included in designs, we want to be there when design is mentioned in the ecosystem. We are trying to create a community whereby we can have people come together and collaborate. It doesn't matter if we are Africans or we are Turkish. There is one language, good design.
Urban Craft does more than art. Stephen and his colleagues are also finding more creative designers.
He encouraged me to get out of the comfort zone. I was mostly working for the Izmir, even not for Istanbul, but he said that I saw your works, you are really focused on details and I want you to work with me. We should work together.
Thanks to that connection, Berk is now designing staircases for houses in Nigeria, because a mix of collaboration, a common passion, and a range of colorful people makes fertile ground for one thing.
We want the world as a global village to be as small as possible, with creative, being able to create products across the continent. When you create it in Turkey, before you know it, you see your product in America. That's the sort of thing we are about to create.
Urban Craft's products have earned them some money, but as a team of diverse artists, they've gained much more than that.
This kind of collaborations is a new way of learning something new, thinking about new things. It always grows up your personality or your design or your art.
Despite working in a highly competitive sector, they hope to expand their festival to New York or London next year and spread the word, as the Yoruba saying goes, about the beauty of collaboration. Yunus Emre, Africa Matters.
This week, we explore Ruhengeri in northern Rwanda. It's a tourism hotspot and gateway city to Volcanoes National Park, which is home to the endangered mountain gorilla. It borders the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Uganda. Let's take a closer look. And that's our show this week. We would like to know what you think about the Dutch apology for its role in the transatlantic slave trade. Should the apology be accepted as it is, or should the Dutch pay reparations to the descendants of slaves in their former colonies? Let us know what you think on Twitter using the hashtag Africa Matters, or reach out to me on my personal handle at Adesewa Josh. You can watch this episode and more on YouTube. Just search Africa Matters TRT World. Like, leave a comment, and share. Thanks a lot for watching, and happy holidays.